Maybe you've been there, maybe you haven't. It's the middle of the month, you've got no money left, but it's happened, your PC is broken. All you're left with is the change in your pocket, but what can you get for that? Probably not much, and you definitely can't afford the new and expensive parts to repair your PC. But what you could get is an entirely new PC for that much. This is the story of the £2 PC build. I picked up this old Acer from the local boot fair for the low price of £2. It looked all intact, but it was bought on the premise of it not working, but we'll see what we can do about that. But when I looked inside, well, I could see why it wasn't working. The whole PC was covered in dust, the cooler had fallen off, the thermal paste was dry, and the power supply fan was hardly spinning. Not to mention the rust that was actually starting to appear internally as well as externally. We had to get all these parts out, so reluctantly we removed all the parts from this PC. It didn't take too long, but still, even touching this thing didn't feel clean. If you could buy tetanus, I'm pretty sure that's what this thing would have given us. Once all the parts were out, the first step was to clean the actual case, which, well, there was only one real choice, and in all honesty, the less touching that had to be done, the better this would turn out for everyone. Once completely soaked, and thus clean, I suppose we left it out in the sun to dry, which actually didn't take too long because it was a lovely day we were having up to this point. As for the CPU cooler, that was in a state, so clearly it was pressure washing time again. As for the motherboard, well, that was relatively simple. A quick wipe down with a cloth as well as a brush over with a small brush solved all the issues. Putting it back together was simple. First we put the CPU back in, followed by a quick blob of thermal paste put on top of it. We stuck with the stock cooler, which cleaned up rather nice. It used the stock AMD mounting system, and the motherboard is a proprietary version of a Foxconn AM2 board, which has a lot of features including a PCI Express slot, SATA support, as well as 4 RAM ports. Putting in the RAM was simple as usual, as it has 2 1GB DIMMs, which ran in dual channel. Next we inserted the power supply unit. Many of you may think this is an unsafe power supply unit, but it is a Delta model capable of providing a reliable amount of power, as they have plenty of experience producing power supply units in the server market. The cables along the bottom were nice to work with and are helped by the internal cable management grips, as well as the front panel connectors, which are a block, making it a lot easier and a lot less fiddly to install. The hard disk drive was connected with a SATA cable. If we wanted more storage, we could have opted for an IDE drive, as they're very cheap nowadays, or just another SATA drive, as this motherboard has plenty of storage expansion slots. Everything slots into where it's meant to go thanks to the nice clipping system that is very reminiscent of newer Corsair cases, which have only just incorporated this feature. And I must say, it is nice not having to use screws every second to make sure something stays stable. Now that it was all plugged in and set up, we can talk about the specs it has. It has an AMD Sempron 3200 Plus clocked in at 1.8 GHz. This is paired with 2GB of DDR2 running in dual channel and integrated Geforce 6100 graphics. Not too shabby for £2, and with all the new features this motherboard supports, it gives us a chance to upgrade in the future should we feel the need to upgrade this PC, which we'll find out later on. Now that a day had passed, it was time to get things up and running, which was quick and simple to do. At first, we found it didn't want to boot off our memory stick, but we found some slots around the back which allows us to boot off the USB. The PC had a nice BIOS, but we weren't going to spend too much time in it, as although it looked nice, it was still very basic with no overclocking functions or anything of that kind of sort. Once all plugged in, we decided to opt for Windows 7 32-bit as it offered a lightweight experience in terms of CPU usage, which I felt was something that was going to be our biggest issue here. As for the Windows install, well, I had time to get dinner twice in between the time it took to finish. Still not a terrible amount of time, but it gave way to some of the weak points the PC may actually have. Once Windows was installed, we installed all the drivers needed, including updated graphics drivers to wireless drivers. While this was happening, we tested the PC in basic web browsing and HD video playback, where it passed with flying colours. Once it had finished, it was time to stick on some relaxing music and get on with the benchmarking. Up first with Half-Life 2, which we ran at 720p in DirectX 8 mode. Now really the graphics chip was fine here and was underutilized the entire time, but the CPU was pegged at 100% the entire time playing. This caused some major slowdowns in physics heavy areas, such as the footage present. This was really not too bad, with averages of 28 FPS and minimums of 14 FPS. The experience wasn't terrible, but still not ideal. Fable The Lost Chapters was run with low and medium settings at 720p, for an average of 24 frames per second with lows of 15 frames per second, when situations put more strain on the CPU. All the resolutions gave the same results because the CPU was still a weak point, but for £2 it was very similar to the original Xbox, with some nicer visuals and less slowdowns where the original Xbox did actually suffer more. Finally, testing newer but simpler games, we had Project Zomboid, which unfortunately wouldn't show fraps, but we did record the averages. It played at an average of 32 FPS, with dips to 27 FPS at the worst of times. This was more than playable and a great way to pass the time. what have we learnt? Well, for £2 you can have a playable PC experience and still get away with some of those great older titles, or even some of the simpler newer ones. Of course the CPU is a weak spot here, but considering how cheap the old parts are, I'm sure it's nothing too expensive if we wanted to upgrade. Thank you very much for watching, good night! And of course, if you enjoyed this, why not subscribe for more, or check out some of the other videos.